Vivo's latest generation of phones needs little introduction. As pioneers of in-glass fingerprint scanners and truly bezel-less designs, Vivo has quickly made a name for itself outside of China, where it has been doing well for itself for a while now. With all the R&D seemingly being put into other parts of the phone though, how well did the cameras turn out? Well, one of the most unique features of the vivo NEX S has to be that pop-up front-facing camera. Specs of this camera are pretty standard despite that cool mechanism, with an 8-megapixel resolution and an f-stop 2.0 lens, along with a pretty standard angle of view. Dynamic range is definitely better than the average front-facing camera out there, and details are marginally better too. When pitting it against the Huawei P20 Pro or HTC U12 Plus, phones that include dedicated space on the front for that front-facing camera, the results generally favor Vivo's camera when everything is added up, including more natural colors and better dynamic range, and typically better overall detail as well. Comparing it to the only other phone with a mechanized front-facing camera out there, the OPPO Find X, it's pretty clear the Find X produces much sharper shots with significantly more detail in basically any situation. Low light support on the vivo NEX S is pretty solid, outperforming many other phones on the market, but still coming in under what the OPPO Find X can offer. There's no traditional portrait mode for the front-facing camera, but Vivo offers something similar through what it calls the selfie lighting effect. This basically blurs and tints the background a certain color, with a choice between 3 preset lighting conditions, as well as a rather nifty monochrome one which leaves the foreground full of color but turns the background black and white. The rest of the camera experience is pretty typical of a modern smartphone, so let's run down the list of features before we look at that rear camera quality. The software layout looks like your average iPhone clone, with very little to differentiate it at all. Let's start with the good at least. The software is lightning fast to launch, no matter where you start it from, although there's no quick gesture to launch it from anywhere, like double tapping the power button for instance. Still, it's not very much work just swiping up on the home screen, and from here you'll essentially be instantly greeted with a fully usable camera. It also focuses lightning fast thanks to the dual-pixel phase detection autofocus on the sensor, the same tech used in sensors on Samsung, HTC, or Google's latest phones. As is typical of this sort of software design, switching modes takes way too long. This is already the worst kind of camera software design because of this sort of thing, and it takes a full second to switch between any mode, especially if trying to swipe through. You can click on the words to switch the mode a little more quickly, but that's really only good if it's displayed on screen at the moment, and there are too many modes to be able to use this for all of them at once. Manual mode is basic, but does offer some long shutter time selections and a relatively high ISO maximum of 3200, but there's no focus peaking for manual focus or much else in the way of advanced options here at all. On the other side of the carousel, you'll find the AR sticker mode, which is pretty standard in its execution as well. The AR sticker selection is very small, essentially just simple masks like we've seen in the past, and nothing crazy like AR Core stickers from Google or other OEMs that have begun adding these into their cameras. This phone does feature AR Core support though, so there's nothing stopping anyone from just downloading one of those apps and utilizing way better AR stuff that way. In standard photo mode, you'll find a row of options up top, none of which feature any kind of descriptors initially, but thankfully do give you a small hint of what they offer after clicking them. HDR toggles, live photo, and portrait modes are a single click away on this top bar, and the options menu is fairly well labeled as a whole, although that 24-megapixel mode could use a bit more explaining. Just saying 24M is kind of vague, and there's no way of really telling what this bizarrely labeled setting does, unless you turn it on and take a few shots with it and then look into the info. Checking out that 24-megapixel mode side by side with the standard 12-megapixel mode reveals little to no difference in most situations, and sometimes this mode actually produced slightly fuzzier pictures, both in bright and low light. It's a mode that definitely harkens back to those 50-megapixel interpolated modes we saw on smartphones for some time, but it just feels less effective than those, and maybe that's why Vivo hit it in here. AI scene identification is a trend that's been used in many phones, but Vivo's implementation of it really just isn't very good. Unless, of course, you enjoy your photos looking like they've been put through Instagram filters all the time. Most of the time, I found this mode just jacks up the saturation to unnatural levels, and really it just seems best to turn it off. Jumping into photo quality in the auto mode, you're going to find that no matter the light, the vivo NEX S's cameras have some absolutely incredible dynamic range. Pictures from this phone, front or back, display some of the absolute widest dynamic range out of any smartphone on the market. Colors really pop and look natural, again, when AI scene identification is off, and overall balance is extremely good. As a whole, pictures from this phone are reliably good and high quality the vast majority of the time, and deliver a sense of confidence that many other phones don't provide. Shots from this phone are consistently brighter, holding better shadow detail, all while suppressing the blown out look that can occur on brighter objects. It's also got more natural color than many of the other phones we've tested, a direct result of better dynamic range, as well as better scene detection for types of light. The only real weakness tends to be the zoom detail, where the processing can be overly heavy at times and muddy up the details. It's not terrible, as we've definitely seen worse from other phones. But with only a 12 megapixel sensor, it's important to have tight processing that does not go overboard on noise reductions. In these situations, it's difficult to tell what the specific culprit of the detail loss might be, but we found that it tends to happen on certain phones when HDR is enabled, as it combines multiple different photos together, each with their own exposure value, and at times that combination could result in loss of fine detail depending on the algorithm used. While this can be fixed on some phones by zooming in through the viewfinder when you need distance detail, there's no optical zoom on the vivo NEX S, so there's going to be no help from that secondary camera when zooming in with the viewfinder. It's not always the loser every single time when it comes to zoom comparisons, but it certainly is the case most of the time. Moderate lighting conditions are generally excellent with this phone, meaning times of the day like dawn or dusk, and also including many different types of indoor lighting as well. In these situations, you'll find the vivo NEX S ranks among the best performers on the market, once again delivering superb dynamic range and color accuracy, while many phones tend to lose color detail or over-brighten shots in these conditions. Photos come away looking bright, clean, and natural looking, and in general are simply superb images. Those large 1.4 micron pixels on this 12 megapixel sensor do a great job of sucking in lots of light, and the f-stop 1.8 lens also helps quite a bit here. These are not the largest pixels on the market, nor the lowest f-stop lens, so while it will not be competing toe-to-toe with low-light champs like the Huawei P20 Pro in most low-light situations, it's definitely better than the average smartphone in these situations, and will likely make anyone happy who's looking for a generally good low-light performer. The same qualities that make other lighting conditions look great on this phone are present here. Good dynamic range, acceptable levels of detail, and probably most importantly in dark situations, excellent natural color accuracy. In fact, I found the warmer tones from the Vivo to be more attractive in these lower lighting conditions than the P20 Pro shots, even if the P20 Pro ended up producing shots that were better in more categories. Portrait mode is rather good as well, but it also depends on what you're looking for. Software-wise, it's able to adjust the virtual aperture on the fly with a quick swipe up or down anywhere on the viewfinder after touching to focus. Aperture defaults at f-stop 1.4, but can range from f-stop 16 for mostly in-focus backgrounds, down to f-stop 0.95 for super blurred backgrounds with tight foreground focus. This can be adjusted after the fact too, so if you'd like the background to be more or less blurry after taking the shot, it's easy going in the gallery and clicking the portrait bokeh button on the bottom. It's not super obvious that this is a button, but given the design, I'd be surprised if it weren't clicked at some point when just scrolling through, even if by accident. As a whole, this mode does a decent job as it utilizes that secondary 5 megapixel camera on the back as a depth sensor specifically for this mode. In fact, because Vivo only uses the second camera as a depth sensor, it's able to catch the portrait mode at a surprisingly quick speed, even with moving objects. While it's not the best portrait quality mode you'll find on any phone, being able to use it in darker situations and while subjects are moving makes it pretty valuable as a whole, especially if you're not blowing up these shots to wallpaper levels. They definitely fall apart when viewing on anything larger than a smartphone screen though, even a screen as big as this one, as there are plenty of points in the shot where the calculation for what's supposed to be in the foreground is just completely wrong. It's also not very good at detecting parts of the photo where gaps occur at times, like the space between the bike and my son's arm in this shot, but then if we move to the next shot in the sequence, you'll find that it got it just right. Thankfully, it is fast at taking these, so take a few at a time and you're bound to end up with something decent. Comparing it with a phone that does a much better job at foreground recognition, like the Huawei P20 Pro for instance, will reveal just how much better recognition could be for more staged shots that don't involve movement. Video is another place where the vivo NEX S truly shines, and it does so in almost every single area. Let's start with the weak points. Slow motion is pretty standard, offering 240 frames per second recording at 1080p resolution, and although this is still stunning slow motion with excellent quality, it's expected to be at least this good at this point in 2018. Many other phones now offer higher frame rates, slowing down the motion even further, but as far as standard slow motion goes, this really is an excellent camera for such a thing. Ultra-fast focusing helps as well, making sure more of the video is actually in focus instead of watching that camera slowly try to refocus instead. There is no support for 60 frames per second recording at 4K resolution, only 60 frames per second at 1080p, but if you're looking for some of the nicest, cleanest, and sharpest 4K outputs on the market, the NEX S has your back. Just like we saw with photo mode, Vivo's HDR methodology is simply incredible and offers not only a brighter picture during the day than the average smartphone, but wider dynamic range as well. With better shadow detail and less blown out highlights, colors appear deeper, richer, and more accurate to life rather than tainted by the side effects of a small sensor trying to keep up with a big task. When comparing it to the HTC U12 Plus, you'll find that they're fairly neck and neck, which is definitely a huge compliment to Vivo. And in this particular scene, the NEX S even edges out the U12 Plus just a bit thanks to the wider dynamic range and some more attractive colors. The same goes for when comparing it next to other major bezel-less phones with a pop-up camera, the OPPO Find X namely, where the vivo NEX S pulls out some significantly better dynamic range and sharper overall details, as well as offering more stable video while walking around. Colors are a bit warm here, and you'll notice that trend throughout the experience, although warmer colors do tend to be a bit more pleasing to the eye. Putting it next to the Huawei P20 Pro shows just how much work Vivo has put into the real-time processing of video. Significantly sharper detail at times, more attractive colors, and many times more accurate colors, especially when higher ISO is used, and better stabilization as well. Something also significantly better than most phones is its ability to not only instantly focus on an object in an incredibly smooth manner, but focus that's unbelievably accurate as well. It absolutely outdoes the P20 Pro in our tests, and schools the OPPO Find X the same way as well. Zooming in will not be as good on this phone as it is with the P20 Pro or OPPO Find X though, as both of those phones feature a secondary camera with optical zoom lens. Watching those phones jump to the secondary camera shows just how important an optical zoom lens can be in certain situations, but the NEX S is still better stabilized than either of those phones regardless of the fact that they might offer enhanced detail, so you may find that one is more preferable over the other if you have to choose. Low-light video performance is good, but nothing overly special. It produces a brighter picture than the OPPO Find X, and also pulls in a tiny bit more detail than that phone as well, not just because it's a brighter picture and you can of course see more objects in a dark scene, but because everything is just a tad sharper as well. It's here where that larger sensor of the Huawei P20 Pro pulls ahead though, as it's both able to suck in more light with more detail, and even zooming into a faraway object with harsh lighting can look significantly better on the P20 Pro over these other two phones. While it's clear a lot of that R&D did go into other components of the phone, Vivo wasn't resting on its laurels for the camera either. It's got tons of positive points, and although it's lacking a few features that some other flagships have, it's got something probably more important than sheer stats: reliability. I took this phone everywhere with me, obviously, but I never once found myself worrying that I would not get the picture that I wanted, and it's that peace of mind that really makes a camera a solid winner for everyday use. We hope you enjoyed that review and will subscribe to us for regularly updated content. Chat with us on your favorite social media network, and don't forget to check out AndroidHeadlines.com for 24/7 tech news coverage. Thanks for watching, and until next time.